Hello. Settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The vast expanse of the American Great Plains, a land of endless sky and boundless opportunity, drew pioneers westward in the mid-19th century. Driven by manifest destiny and the promise of fertile soil, these hardy souls often overlooked the stark realities of the unforgiving climate. By late autumn, as the sun dipped lower and the wind began its ceaseless moan, a chilling truth emerged. Winter on the plains was a formidable, often deadly adversary. Imagine standing in November 1864, somewhere near what is now Kearney, Nebraska. The golden grasses, once swaying gently, now stand brittle and pale. A metallic tang hangs in the air, a prelude to the impending freeze. Pioneers, primarily from eastern states or European countries, were often unprepared for the ferocity of plains winters. Unlike the coastal areas or wooded regions they knew, the plains offered little natural shelter. Trees were scarce, and building materials were precious commodities, often hauled hundreds of miles by ox cart. Historical accounts and archaeological findings reveal a consistent pattern. Early settlements, particularly before the widespread availability of timber and advanced construction techniques, were extraordinarily vulnerable. The Old Farmer's Almanac, a vital resource of the period, often underestimated the extreme temperature swings and sudden blizzards characteristic of the region. Records from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, established in 1870 and tasked with meteorological observations, later corroborated the anecdotal evidence of brutal cold. Data from Fort Riley, Kansas, for instance, shows average January temperatures often dipping below 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills plummeting well below zero. The first frost, a white shroud dusting the prairie, was more than just a seasonal marker. It was a grave warning. The frozen whisper of the plains was the sound of the wind, carrying not just ice crystals, but the chilling realization that survival would demand ingenuity, resilience, and often retreat. As the temperature continued its descent, threatening sudden blizzards that could bury an entire wagon train in a single night, pioneers were forced to confront a stark choice: brave the elements in flimsy structures or find refuge beneath the very land they sought to conquer. This desperate need for survival sparked a remarkable architectural adaptation, demonstrating humanity's enduring capacity to endure against overwhelming odds. As the first snowfalls powdered the vast plains, the structural inadequacies of early pioneer dwellings became glaringly apparent. Log cabins, if timber was even available, were labor-intensive and often poorly insulated. Sod houses, while offering better thermal mass, were still susceptible to strong winds and moisture intrusion. It was this urgent need for robust shelter that drove pioneers to look not heavenward, but downward. The solution lay beneath their feet, the earth itself. Drawing on ancestral knowledge of dugouts and cellars, and a keen understanding of thermodynamics, pioneers began excavating. These early earth shelters, often called dugouts or sod houses, were not merely holes in the ground, but engineered constructions designed to mitigate the extreme cold. Archaeological excavations at pioneer homesteads across the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas consistently uncover evidence of these subterranean and semi-subterranean structures dating from the 1850s through the 1870s. A typical dugout would involve digging into the side of a hill or bank, creating an enclosure often 10 to 15 feet wide and 15 to 20 feet deep. The exposed front wall, if any, would be constructed of sod bricks. strips of prairie turf held together by their dense root systems, cut into uniform blocks typically 12 x and 18 x 4 inches. Ceilings were often supported by cottonwood poles, covered with willow branches, then layers of sod, and finally, earth. These layers provided crucial insulation. Historian Everett Dick, in his seminal work The Sod House Frontier, meticulously describes the construction process and the widespread reliance on these dwellings. The ingenious aspect of these earth shelters was their thermal stability. Soil acts as a natural insulator, its dense mass slowing the transfer of heat. Below the frost line, typically 2 to 3 feet deep in these regions, ground temperatures remain relatively constant, often around 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. By embedding their homes into the earth, pioneers leveraged this geothermal property. While not warm by modern standards, these underground spaces offered a vital refuge where temperatures rarely dropped below freezing, even when thermometers above ground registered 30 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. This stark contrast meant the difference between life and death during a blizzard, preventing frostbite and hypothermia, particularly for children and the elderly. It was a desperate hope, carved from the very land, providing a sanctuary against the deadly freeze. Stepping into a pioneer dugout, one was immediately enveloped by the pervasive, earthy scent of damp soil. These shelters, though life-saving, were far from luxurious. They represented a stark, often claustrophobic existence, a tomb of living breath, where families huddled together, weathering the savage blizzards outside. The very design that provided safety also presented a new set of challenges, demanding constant vigilance and adaptation. Archaeological digs and historical accounts provide detailed insights into the internal environment of these subterranean dwellings. The average dimensions of a family dugout, perhaps 12 by 18 feet, meant incredibly cramped living quarters, especially for families with multiple children. Ventilation was a critical concern. Without a proper chimney or air circulation system, the air quickly became stale and heavy with the smoke from cooking fires, the breath of several people, and the lingering dampness. This lack of fresh air often led to respiratory issues and exacerbated the spread of illness within these confined spaces. Historians like John Hudson, specializing in plain settlement patterns, note the significant health challenges faced by dugout residents, including chronic coughs and susceptibility to communicable diseases. Lighting was another major hurdle. Windows were rare or rudimentary, often just small openings covered with greased paper or stretched animal hide, offering minimal natural light. Inside, the primary source of illumination came from tallow candles or rudimentary oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on the earthen walls and accentuating the feeling of confinement. The darkness, combined with the interminable duration of winter storms, sometimes lasting for days, even weeks, contributed to profound psychological strain. Pioneer diaries often speak of the endless night and the pervasive sense of isolation. The damp earth walls and ceiling, while excellent insulators, also meant persistent moisture. This moisture was not only uncomfortable, but invited mold growth and created an ideal environment for pests. Rodents and insects were constant companions, gnawing at stored provisions and carrying disease. Imagine the relentless anxiety of maintaining food stores, protecting them from unwelcome visitors, all while surviving on meager rations in the dim, damp confines. This struggle beneath the earth was a testament to the pioneers' will to survive, transforming a literally grave situation into a sanctuary of last resort. Within the damp, earthen confines of a dugout, The hearth, however humble, was the pulsing heart of survival. It wasn't merely a place to cook. It was a psychological anchor, a source of light, and a wall against the white fury raging outside. The flickering promise of its flames represented warmth, sustenance, and the fragile continuation of life itself. Fueling these subterranean fires was a constant challenge on the treeless plains. Pioneers, devoid of traditional firewood, turned to indigenous resources. Buffalo chips, dried bison dung, were a primary, albeit unpleasant, fuel source. Rich in plant fibers, these readily available materials burned hot and slow, though they emitted a distinctive, acrid smoke. Other alternatives included twisted hay, prairie grass, and even dried stalks of sunflowers. Research into pioneer economics highlights the considerable time and effort dedicated to gathering and storing these unconventional fuels, recognizing their absolute necessity for winter survival. Cooking in a dugout was a rudimentary affair. Iron pots and skillets, often the only substantial kitchenware a family possessed, were suspended over the open flame or placed directly onto the coals. Food preparation emphasized simple, hearty fare: dried corn, beans, salt pork, and any preserved meats or vegetables. The limited space and fuel meant inefficient cooking practices, but the goal was nourishment, not culinary artistry. Food, carefully rationed, offered vital calories to combat the pervasive cold and maintain energy for daily tasks within the constricted space. Beyond sustenance, the hearth provided critical radiant heat, countering the perpetual chill of the earth. Studies in thermal comfort indicate that even a small open fire can significantly raise the perceived temperature in an enclosed space, making it tolerable even if the ambient air remains cool. For settlers, the visual and physical warmth produced a vital sense of security, transforming an otherwise bleak chamber into a defensible sanctuary. The sustained effort to keep that flame alive, to maintain its flickering promise against the overwhelming force of the winter storm, underscored the profound resourcefulness and tenacity required to carve out a life on the brutal American frontier. This struggle wasn't just physical, it was a continuous battle for hope. Outside the earthen walls of the dugout, the true terror of a Great Plains winter found its voice in the symphony of the gale. This was no gentle snowfall, but a relentless, howling wind, pushing mountains of snow across the treeless expanse, a deafening lullaby of destruction that tested the very limits of human endurance. For days, sometimes weeks, the world above ground became a featureless white maelstrom, rendering travel and communication impossible. Historical weather records, reconstructed from pioneer diaries, army post logs, and early meteorological observations, paint a grim picture. The winter of 1880-1881, for instance, became legendary as the snow winter, bringing consecutive blizzards that buried entire settlements under drifts often reaching 20 to 30 feet. The infamous Children's Blizzard of January 1888 struck without warning on a relatively mild day, trapping thousands, including many school children, resulting in hundreds of fatalities across Nebraska, the Dakotas, and Minnesota. These events underscore the extreme volatility and sudden onset of plains weather phenomena. Within the dugout, the sounds of the blizzard were muffled but pervasive. The constant roar of the wind pressing against the earth, the eerie creaking of the sod roof under immense snow loads, and the occasional sharp crack of ice could transform the relative safety of the underground retreat into a psychological prison. Visibility, even a few feet from the dugout entrance, dropped to zero, creating a disorienting whiteout that could lead a person astray within steps of their own home. Survival guides of the era specifically warned against venturing out during such storms without a rope tied to the dugout, a testament to the life-threatening disorientation. The sheer volume of snow posed a significant threat. Drifts could swiftly bury dugout entrances, trapping families inside, necessitating tunneling out once the storm abated. Expert analysis of building techniques from the period consistently highlights the need for steeply sloped roofs in sod houses and strategic placement of dugouts to minimize snow accumulation around exits. This constant, overwhelming force of nature was a defining characteristic of plain survival, demanding not just physical resilience, but an unyielding mental fortitude against the symphony of the gale. Within the subterranean world of the dugout, as the blizzard raged above, the pervasive darkness and the omnipresent rumble of the storm fostered a unique environment for human interaction. It created whispers in the dark, conversations often hushed to conserve limited light, or simply to pierce the surrounding cacophony, but also bore the profound weight of shared silence, unspoken anxieties, and steadfast endurance. The psychological toll of prolonged confinement, coupled with the existential threat of the storm, was immense. Sensory deprivation, the lack of natural light, the monotonous soundscape of the wind, and the unchanging earthy aroma contributed to a heightened state of awareness, yet also to feelings of isolation. Historians specializing in frontier psychology, such as Lillian Schlissel, highlight the significant stress factors experienced by pioneer women, in particular, who often bore the primary responsibility for maintaining the household and comforting children in these dire conditions. Family dynamics were intensely tested. Forced into constant, close proximity, personality conflicts could escalate, yet the shared vulnerability often forged an unbreakable bond. Children, despite the fear, often found ways to adapt, playing quiet games with found objects or listening to stories told by parents, as documented in various pioneer memoirs from the Dakota Territory. These narratives often emphasize the importance of maintaining routines, however simple, to ward off despair and keep a semblance of normalcy. The weight of shared silence in these situations was profound. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, but the presence of unspoken fears. Fear of the store of buffalo chips running out. Fear of the structural integrity of the roof under the snow. Fear of illness in such cramped quarters. Yet, this shared silence also contained immense strength, a collective, unspoken understanding of their predicament, and a resolute determination to face it together. It was in these underground chambers, amidst the storm's fury, that the true character of the pioneer spirit was forged, a spirit of grim perseverance rooted in community and the will to survive against unbelievable odds. The air inside a besieged dugout during a blizzard was thick, heavy, and often rank. The taste of stale air, a constant reminder of confinement. Compounded by the omnipresent hunger pangs, life underground often devolved into a desperate struggle against deprivation, pushing human resilience to its absolute limits. These conditions were not mere discomforts. They were critical threats to health and survival. Ventilation, as previously noted, was severely limited in dugouts. With multiple occupants, a small, often unvented cooking fire, and primitive sanitation, the air quality rapidly deteriorated. Carbon monoxide poisoning, though unrecognized and undiagnosed at the time, was a very real and lethal threat from poorly vented fires. Studies of historical dwellings by environmental archaeologists often highlight the high concentrations of particulate matter and carbon dioxide found in such enclosed spaces. contributing to chronic respiratory problems that plagued many pioneers. Headaches, dizziness, and lethargy were common complaints, often attributed to the dampness. Beyond the stifling air, the gnawing anxiety of dwindling food supplies was a perpetual companion. Pioneers migrated with what they could carry, and while foresight often dictated bringing staples like flour, dried beans, smoked meats, and preserved vegetables, these provisions were finite. Blizzards could cut off supply routes for weeks, even months, leaving isolated families entirely dependent on what they had stored. The harsh reality meant rationing became a critical daily ritual. A single potato, a small piece of suet, or a handful of dried corn could be the foundation of a day's meal for an entire family. Diaries from pioneers such as Mary Elizabeth Wilson, homesteading in Kansas in the 1870s, vividly describe the psychological torment of hunger. She recounts dreams of fresh bread and the painstaking decisions made to stretch meager rations for her children. Caloric deficits led to weakness, increased susceptibility to illness, and a profound sense of vulnerability. This brutal reality forced ingenuity in food preservation and resource management, often blurring the lines between what was edible and what was merely sustenance. The constant taste of stale air and the unrelenting pangs of hunger were not simply physical sensations. They were powerful indicators of the precarious balance between survival and starvation. Within the confines of the dugout, where natural light rarely penetrated and the howl of the blizzard obscured all sense of the outside world, time itself became an enemy. The scratches on the wall were more than just marks. They were a desperate calendar of endless days, a poignant record of minds battling isolation and the creeping dread of the unknown. For pioneers trapped underground, particularly during prolonged blizzards, the loss of temporal markers was disorienting. Days blurred into nights, and the passage of time became an internal, subjective experience. Without clocks, and with the sun obscured for days on end, basic human rhythms were disrupted. This sensory deprivation and disruption of circadian rhythms have been linked by modern neuropsychology to increased anxiety, depression, and cognitive impairment. For the pioneers, this manifested in heightened psychological stress. The need to mark the passage of time was deeply ingrained. Crude calendars, often simply tally marks carved into the earthen walls or scratched onto a piece of wood, served as a crucial coping mechanism. These simple acts provided a sense of control over an uncontrollable situation, a tangible link to a world where days still advanced. Expert analysis of pioneer journals reveals a preoccupation with dating entries, even when significant events were lacking, underscoring the psychological importance of chronological anchors. The sheer duration of these confinements was often extraordinary. Records show that some families could be trapped in their dugouts for 2 to 3 weeks during severe winter storms in the 1870s and 1880s across the Dakotas and Nebraska. Imagine enduring such an incarceration with limited food, stale air, and the constant threat of the weather, all while watching the tally marks grow on the wall, signifying yet another day survived, yet another day closer to spring's elusive promise. The scratches on the wall weren't just a record. They were a testament to psychological endurance, a silent narrative of hope clinging to existence amidst the suffocating weight of endless, isolated time. Even within the earthen sanctuary of the dugout, the relentless cold of the Great Plains winter found ways to penetrate. It was the chill that cuts deep, right to the marrow, a pervasive cold that defied every layer of clothing and gnawed at the body's reserves of warmth. While dugouts offered superior protection against wind chill and external temperatures, they were rarely perfectly insulated, and the constant battle against hypothermia remained a significant threat. The average internal temperature of a well-constructed dugout during a blizzard might hover around 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 and 7 degrees Celsius, significantly warmer than the 20 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside, but still below comfortable living conditions. This constant, moderately cold environment subjected occupants to chronic cold stress. Expert climatologists examining historical weather data note that prolonged exposure to temperatures above freezing but below 50 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius, can lead to non-freezing cold injuries and significantly tax the body's thermoregulatory system. To combat this, pioneers relied heavily on layers of clothing, often woolen or animal hides, worn continuously. Blankets, furs, and homemade quilts were vital for sleeping. Despite their efforts, frostbite was a common and often debilitating injury, particularly to extremities. Pioneer medical texts and first-hand accounts from frontier doctors frequently describe the treatment of frozen fingers, toes, and ears, sometimes leading to amputation without anesthesia. The suffering was immense, and the long-term disabilities were a harsh reality of frontier life. Beyond direct cold exposure, the dampness inherent to dugouts exacerbated the chill. Moisture conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than dry air. The pervasive humidity within these earth shelters, combined with perspiration and condensed breath, made it harder for pioneers to stay truly warm, even with heavy clothing. This insidious combination of cold and dampness contributed to the prevalence of debilitating illnesses like rheumatism and bronchitis among long-term dugout residents. The chill that cut deep was not just a sensation, it was a constant, tangible enemy, reminding inhabitants of the fragile boundary between life and the embrace of the frozen earth. Beneath the tons of snow and earth, cut off from the vibrant world above, sunlight became a cherished, almost mythical entity. Trapped in the earthen gloom of their dugouts, pioneers found their spirits sustained by dreams of sunlight, a powerful mirage that represented not just warmth and brightness, but the very essence of life returning to the frozen plains. This longing for the sun was more than poetic. It was a deeply ingrained physiological and psychological need. The lack of natural light, specifically sunlight, had profound physical and mental health consequences for dugout inhabitants. Modern medical science confirms that insufficient exposure to sunlight can lead to vitamin D deficiency, impacting bone health and immune function, and disrupting mood regulation. For pioneers, this manifested as a pervasive lethargy, weakened resistance to disease, and a higher incidence of seasonal affective disorder, predating its formal recognition. The gloom was not just visual, it infiltrated the body and mind. Pioneer diaries and letters frequently contain yearning descriptions for the return of the sun. They speak of the psychological burden of endless grey days, even when the immediate threat of a blizzard had passed. The earthen gloom stifled hope, and the absence of the sun's invigorating rays made the confinement feel even more oppressive. Historians examining personal accounts from the Great Plains frontier often find meticulous notes about the weather, particularly the return of clarity and sunlight, which were always hailed as momentous events far beyond simple meteorological observations. The arrival of direct sunlight, even if only through a small opening or reflecting off the snow near an entrance, was a moment of profound joy and relief. It was a tangible sign that the grip of winter might be loosening, that the external world was once again accessible, and that the long, arduous confinement might soon end. These fleeting moments of brightness offered a crucial psychological uplift, a powerful counter to the claustrophobic dread. The dreams of sunlight were not fantasies. They were a vital source of resilience, a deep-seated human desire for warmth, life, and the promise of a new season. In the constricted, damp interiors of the pioneer dugout, comfort was a luxury rarely afforded. Yet, even in such austere conditions, pioneers strove to create spaces for rest and slumber, forming thin cocoons against the relentless cold. The rustle of straw was the sound of these makeshift beds, a bed of fragile comfort, signifying both the scarcity of resources and the enduring human need for a place to lay one's head. Bedding options in early dugouts were dictated by availability and necessity. Commercial mattresses were practically non-existent on the early frontier. Instead, pioneers relied on natural materials. Straw, dried prairie grasses, or cattail stalks were commonly used to fill rough sacks, creating functional, albeit temporary, mattresses. These organic materials offered a degree of insulation from the cold, damp earth floor and provided a softer surface than bare ground. Ethnobotanical studies confirm the use of various grasses and sedges by indigenous peoples for bedding, a practice likely adopted by settlers. However, these organic beds came with their own set of challenges. Straw and grass were highly susceptible to dampness, quickly becoming moldy and malodorous in the humid dugout environment. They also provided ideal breeding grounds for pests such as fleas, mites, and other insects, which further exacerbated the hygiene challenges within the confined spaces. Regular replacement of bedding material was essential, but often difficult during prolonged blizzards when venturing outside was impossible. This required substantial stores of dry straw, a commodity often competing with animal fodder. Moreover, the sheer practicality of sleeping arrangements in a small dugout meant little privacy. Families often slept huddled together for warmth, sharing blankets and furs. The concept of individual bedrooms was a distant ideal. This collective sleeping pattern, while offering thermal advantages, intensified the feeling of constant proximity discussed in the earlier chapters, further highlighting the lack of personal space. The rustle of straw, therefore, was more than just an auditory detail. It was a sensory marker of a shared, austere existence, where even the most basic comfort was hard-won and fragile, a stark reminder of the uncompromising realities of pioneering life. Despite the immediate, all-consuming struggle for survival within the dugout, the human spirit persistently reached beyond its earthen walls. The echo of a distant life, a world beyond the dugout's veil, resonated deeply within the pioneers' minds, reminding them of the civilization they had left behind and the communities they longed to build. This mental connection to the outside world, though physically severed, was vital for maintaining sanity and purpose. For many pioneers, especially those who had migrated from more settled eastern regions or European countries, the isolation of the Great Plains was a profound cultural shock. Access to news, mail, and social gatherings was severely restricted, particularly during winter. The nearest town might be dozens of miles away, and neighbors, if any, even further. This geographical isolation was compounded by the blizzards, which could render communication impossible for weeks. Historical records, such as those detailing the communication challenges of early homesteaders in Kansas and Nebraska, highlight the psychological impact of this enforced solitude. Within the confines of the dugout, this longing for connection manifested in various ways. Cherished possessions, a family Bible, a photograph, a worn letter, became powerful symbols of the world outside, tangible links to a past life and a future hope. Storytelling, reading, and even collective prayer served as crucial diversions and ways to reinforce familial and cultural bonds. The mere act of recalling events from home or discussing future plans for the farm provided a mental escape from the immediate, overwhelming reality. This mental engagement with a world beyond the blizzard's immediate fury was not a mere luxury. It was a profound psychological coping mechanism. It provided a sense of continuity, a belief that the hardship was temporary and that life would eventually return to a semblance of normalcy. The echo of a distant life, therefore, functioned as an internal compass, guiding their resolve through the darkest hours. It underscored the fundamental human need for community and context, even when physically separated by miles of snow and earth, a testament to the enduring power of hope against the overwhelming silence of the wilderness. While the blizzard raged outside, an equally formidable and often invisible enemy lurked within the rudimentary shelters. The looming shadow of disease and accident, a threat beyond the frost itself, transformed dugouts into potential death traps, pushing the pioneers' vulnerability to its absolute limit. These unseen dangers added a layer of pervasive anxiety to the already harsh reality of winter survival. The cramped, damp, and poorly ventilated conditions endemic to dugouts created an ideal breeding ground for pathogens. Respiratory illnesses, such as pneumonia and bronchitis, were particularly prevalent due, in part, to extreme temperature fluctuations between interior and exterior, high humidity, and poor air quality filled with smoke particulates from indoor fires. Measles, diphtheria, and whooping cough, common infectious diseases of the era, spread rapidly and fiercely within the close quarters, often claiming entire families. Lacking understanding of germ theory, pioneers had no effective means of preventing or treating these outbreaks. Medical historians document the high mortality rates, particularly among children, in frontier settlements during winter months. Furthermore, the very design of the dugout, while protective against the cold, introduced new risks. Collapsing roofs, saturated by melting snow or weakened by internal dampness, posed a constant danger. Accounts from the Kansas Historical Society archives include tragic stories of families buried by sudden structural failures. Fires, sparked by open hearths in close proximity to flammable straw bedding, represented another catastrophic threat in a contained space with limited escape routes. These incidents, though perhaps less frequent than disease, were instantaneous and devastating. The threat of starvation, explored in earlier chapters, also had a direct bearing on health. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, making individuals more susceptible to disease and less capable of recovery. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was a particular concern during long winters when fresh produce was unavailable. The looming shadow was therefore a complex interplay of environmental factors, lack of medical knowledge, and resource scarcity, collectively presenting a multifaceted and often unavoidable danger that extended far beyond the obvious peril of the frost itself. In the face of relentless blizzards, dwindling supplies, and the ever-present threat of disease, pioneers often found themselves at the very edge of human endurance. When rational solutions had been exhausted and physical strength waned, many turned to what little comfort remained: faith. The silent prayer became a profound, unspoken bargain with the bitter wind, a desperate plea for survival in a world that seemed determined to erase them. Religion, predominantly various denominations of Christianity, was a cornerstone of 19th century American life and played an even more crucial role on the isolated frontier. In communities stripped of governmental services, medical aid, and even basic social structures during extreme weather, faith provided a framework for coping with adversity, finding meaning in suffering, and maintaining hope. Pioneer diaries and letters frequently attest to the deeply spiritual nature of their struggles, framing survival as a divine test or a blessing. Historian Ferrell Egan, in his chronicling of the Children's Blizzard of 1888, notes the countless accounts of individuals turning to prayer when all else failed, seeking intervention against the literal and metaphorical darkness. This inherent reliance on spirituality was not merely a passive act, it was an active coping mechanism. Group prayer and hymn singing within the confines of a dugout offered a psychological release, fostering communal solidarity and distracting from the grim realities. For individuals, personal prayer provided a profound sense of agency and comfort in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. It was a means to articulate fears, to mourn losses, and to psychologically prepare for the unknown, often in the quiet moments after children had fallen asleep or during the long watches of the night. The bargain with the bitter wind was a metaphorical transaction, an unspoken promise of repentance or future dedication in exchange for deliverance. It reflected the profound human need to find order in chaos and purpose in suffering. This silent, fervent appeal underscored the ultimate vulnerability of these pioneers against the raw power of the Great Plains winter. It was a testament to the fact that beyond all their ingenious practical adaptations, their very survival often hinged on an enduring faith, an unwavering belief that they would somehow endure until spring. During the brutal confinement of winter, when fresh food was a distant memory, the persistent aroma of smoked meat was not merely a smell, but a sensory testament to foresight, diligence, and survival. It was a feast for the desperate, a crucial source of calories and comfort in an environment designed to deplete both. The ability to preserve food, particularly meat, was paramount to weathering the long, isolated months. Pioneers arriving on the plains understood the critical necessity of stocking provisions. While farming was a primary goal, the first winter often preceded a successful harvest. Thus, hunting and effective preservation techniques were vital. The plains, before widespread settlement, offered abundant game, primarily bison and deer, though domesticated hogs and cattle also became central to the pioneer diet. Meat, once acquired, faced the immediate challenge of spoilage. Without refrigeration, smoking, salting, and drying were the only reliable methods of preservation. Smoking was a favored technique for its efficacy and the distinct flavor it imparted. Meat would be cured with salt, then hung in a smokehouse, or, in cruder setups, simply near the top of the dugout entrance or a temporary lean-to, where it would be exposed to slow-burning fires, often of hardwoods for flavor or available prairie woods. This process dried the meat and infused it with compounds from the smoke, inhibiting bacterial growth. Archaeological findings at pioneer homesteads often include remnants of rudimentary smoke pits or cured jerky, confirming these practices. A feast for the desperate implied careful rationing. Smoked meats, stored often in barrels or wrapped to keep pests away, were consumed sparingly to last through the extended winter. This was a critical component of the caloric intake, providing essential proteins and fats. Historians and nutritionists studying pioneer diets emphasize the high reliance on these preserved meats, particularly through the lean winter months. Though monotonous and far from the varied diet we know today, the aroma of smoked meat signaled the presence of sustenance, a visceral reassurance against the gnawing hunger and the pervasive despair, sustaining both body and spirit in the face of the Wild West's harshest season. In the suffocating closeness of the dugout, where the physical world offered little solace, human connection and the power of narrative became invaluable resources. The spark of a story was more than mere entertainment. It was a psychological lifeline, a flame against the cold despair that threatened to engulf the confined inhabitants. Storytelling, often passed down through generations, became a vital means of maintaining morale, educating children, and preserving cultural identity. Trapped for prolonged periods, with limited physical activity and sensory stimulation, families turned inwards for engagement. Reading aloud from the rare book or a well-worn Bible was common, but the oral tradition of storytelling held particular resonance. Historical accounts and memoirs frequently describe pioneer evenings spent recounting personal histories, sharing tales from the old country, or narrating familiar parables. These narratives served multiple functions. They educated children about their heritage and the dangers of the frontier, provided a moral compass, and offered a powerful escape from the monotonous, grim reality of their immediate surroundings. Research into the sociology of isolated groups consistently highlights the importance of shared narrative in maintaining social cohesion and mitigating psychological distress. For pioneer families, these stories offered a connection to a larger human experience, reminding them that they were part of a continuum, not merely isolated survivors. The act of listening and participating in these shared imaginings fostered a sense of community within the close quarters, counteracting the profound isolation imposed by the blizzard. The flickering light of a candle or the warm glow from the hearth enhanced the atmospheric magic of these oral traditions. These narratives also provided a critical outlet for imagination, a crucial element in coping with adversity. They allowed minds to travel beyond the earthen walls, to conjure images of fertile lands, distant relatives, or future prosperity. The spark of a story ignited hope, reminding them of the potential that lay beyond the present hardship. It was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find and create light, even in the deepest gloom, transforming a simple tale into a powerful force against the cold despair of the waiting winter. Above the heads of the huddled pioneer families, the roof of their dugout, often a simple construction of timber and sod, bore the immense weight of winter. The creaking timber was not just a sound. It was a constant, unsettling symphony of strain and survival, a palpable reminder of the battle waged against the colossal forces of nature. Every groan, every snap, was a whisper of potential collapse. Dugout roofs, particularly in areas where timber was scarce, were ingeniously adapted, but inherently vulnerable. The primary support structure typically consisted of cottonwood poles or rough-hewn logs spanning the excavated chamber. Across these, pioneers laid smaller branches, then layers of brush, prairie hay, and finally, thick sections of sod. The sod, with its dense root systems, acted as both insulation and a protective layer. However, this design was critically dependent on the integrity of the underlying timber. Structural engineering analysis of these historical constructions reveals that while they provided a high thermal mass, their load-bearing capacity was finite. The cumulative effect of heavy snowfalls was the most significant stressor. A cubic foot of fresh, powdery snow weighs approximately 7 pounds. Wet, packed snow can weigh up to 21 pounds per cubic foot. During multi-day blizzards, drifts accumulated rapidly, sometimes reaching depths of 10 to 20 feet over a dugout. This translated into thousands of pounds of pressure on the roof timbers, continually intensifying over the course of a long winter. The creaking and groaning sounds were the timber literally deforming under this immense, sustained load. Accounts from the Kansas State Historical Society archives detail instances where snow loads became so extreme that pioneers were forced to periodically tunnel out and shovel snow off their roofs, a perilous task in a blizzard. Furthermore, water intrusion from melting snow exacerbated the problem. Even minor leaks could saturate the sod and timbers, weakening their structural integrity and adding further weight. The threat of total collapse, burying families alive beneath tons of earth and snow, was a very real, though unspoken, fear that permeated the deep winter months. The creaking timber was therefore a daily reminder of the precarious balance between the shelter's protective embrace and its potential to become a tomb, making every sound a note in the dramatic symphony of survival. In the extreme conditions of the dugout, where the battle for survival was constant and the threat of despair ever present, human touch transcended mere physical contact. The hand's warm touch became a profound connection in the claustrophobia, a non-verbal affirmation of shared existence and mutual reliance that was crucial for psychological endurance. This simple gesture often served as a lifeline in the oppressive gloom. The sheer physical proximity within a dugout meant that individuals were constantly aware of one another. For families, this enforced closeness, while at times stressful, also fostered an intense bond. Child development experts emphasize the importance of physical contact for comfort and reassurance, particularly in stressful environments. For the children in a pioneer dugout, a parent's touch, a hand holding theirs, an arm around a shoulder, provided crucial stability amidst the terrifying sounds of the blizzard and the deep sense of isolation. This tactile connection extended beyond mere comfort. In the low light and cramped conditions, non-verbal communication gained heightened significance. A reassuring squeeze of a hand, a gentle pat on the back, or the shared warmth of huddled bodies spoke volumes where words might be inadequate or energy scarce. These small, constant physical affirmations reinforced family unity and solidarity, crucial in battling the psychological toll of isolation and fear. Anthropological studies of human resilience often highlight the importance of physical co-regulation within groups facing extreme hardship, where close proximity and touch help to synchronize physiological responses to stress. Moreover, the physical acts of care, a mother tending to a sick child, a husband supporting his wife during labor, siblings sharing warmth, were all imbued with the power of touch. These moments, often unrecorded in formal histories but deeply etched in personal memory, formed the bedrock of familial support. The hand's warm touch was a primal response to a hostile world, a tangible manifestation of love, empathy, and collective determination. It transformed a physically confining space into a deeply connected human nexus, proving that even in the most claustrophobic circumstances, the power of human connection could ignite a beacon of hope against insurmountable odds. After days or even weeks of blizzard conditions, the relentless howl of the wind would sometimes lessen, replaced by an eerie, almost sacred quiet. Through a tiny opening, or even just a perception filtering through the sod roof, a faint glimmer of morning might appear. Yet this break in the storm was often a deceptive promise in the snow, signaling not an end to hardship, but merely a new phase of the struggle. This momentary reprieve, while a powerful psychological uplift, brought with it a different set of dangers. The cessation of the snowfall didn't mean an end to the cold. Indeed, some of the most dangerously low temperatures occurred in the calm, clear aftermath of a blizzard, due to radiational cooling. Historical meteorological data from the 1880s plains confirms that temperatures could plummet even further post-storm, sometimes reaching 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Ventures outside, even for a short time, to check on livestock or clear an entrance, still carried extreme risk of frostbite and hypothermia. The snow itself, initially a barrier against the wind, transformed into a different kind of threat. Massive drifts, often meters high, could effectively imprison families within their dugouts, burying entrances and exits. Exiting required arduous digging, sometimes tunneling through dense, icy snow, a laborious and dangerous task. Furthermore, the vast expanse of white, devoid of familiar landmarks, created an disorienting landscape. Even a short journey from the dugout could lead to becoming hopelessly lost mere yards from safety. The children's blizzard of 1888 famously highlighted this danger, with many fatalities occurring when individuals attempted to navigate short distances in the post-storm whiteout. Moreover, the initial clear skies, though promising, were often merely a temporary lull. The capricious nature of Great Plains weather meant that a brief sunny interval could quickly give way to another cold front and another blizzard, trapping unprepared individuals outside. The deceptive promise of a clear morning required keen observation and deep understanding of the local weather patterns. For the pioneer, this meant that the battle for survival intensified even when the immediate storm subsided, transforming a temporary psychological relief into a period of heightened caution and sustained effort, anticipating the next, inevitable onset of winter's fury. As the blizzards eventually receded and the sun regained its strength, pioneers emerged from their subterranean sanctuaries, bearing not just the physical scars of winter, but also the indelible burden of memory. This collection of experiences, both terrifying and resilient, became what carries you through the storm, a personal and collective narrative of survival that shaped individuals, families, and the nascent communities of the American West. The psychological impact of prolonged isolation, deprivation, and constant threat, as explored in previous chapters, left deep imprints. Testimonies from survivors often recount the sensory details of the dugout experience: the smell of damp earth, the incessant wind, the taste of stale food, and the profound silence between gusts. These memories, etched into their psyche, informed their future decisions, from improving their dwellings to more rigorously preparing for succeeding winters. Academic studies of trauma and resilience suggest that experiencing such extreme conditions can lead to post-traumatic stress, but also to significant personal growth and a heightened appreciation for human connection and basic necessities. This burden of memory, however, was not solely negative. It also encompassed the triumphs of resourcefulness, the strength of familial bonds, and the quiet heroism displayed in the face of overwhelming odds. It was the memory of a shared laugh over a meager meal, a child's hand held tight, or the ingenious solution to a dire problem. These positive recollections served as powerful reinforcing agents, strengthening community ties and fostering a collective identity forged in hardship. The stories told around future hearths would be imbued with these shared experiences, acting as educational tools for the next generation. Ultimately, what carried these pioneers through the storm was a complex interplay of internal and external factors: their practical skills, their spiritual faith, their interpersonal relationships, and their sheer, unyielding will. But it was the burden of memory, the profound and often haunting record of what they had endured and overcome, that became their most enduring legacy. It shaped their perspective, deepened their resolve, and provided a powerful narrative of resilience that continues to resonate today, reminding us of the extraordinary human capacity for survival in the face of nature's formidable power. After months of frozen desolation, the first signs of spring on the Great Plains were often heralded not by gentle warmth, but by a dramatic shift in temperature, the sudden thaw. While a welcome relief from the brutal cold, this rapid transition brought its own formidable challenges. Snow and ice, accumulated over an entire winter, suddenly transformed into torrents of water, and rivers, once locked in an icy embrace, became raging, destructive forces. The prairies themselves, largely flat or gently rolling, offered little natural drainage for the enormous volumes of meltwater. Historical climatological data from periods like the late 19th century reveal that spring thaws often occurred quickly, sometimes with temperature swings of 30–50 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of days. This rapid temperature increase, combined with ground still frozen below the surface, permafrost or seasonally frozen ground, meant the water had nowhere to go but across the surface. This resulted in widespread sheet flooding, transforming vast areas into temporary marshes and lakes. For dugout dwellers, this presented an immediate peril. Dugouts, by their very nature, were excavations in the earth, and many were built into hillsides or riverbanks for convenience and structural stability. While initially excellent insulators, these locations became highly vulnerable during a sudden thaw. Water could seep into the earthen walls, saturating the sod and potentially leading to structural failure, as discussed previously. More critically, dugouts located in low-lying areas or close to rising streams were at severe risk of being inundated. Records from the Nebraska State Historical Society document numerous instances of dugouts being partially or completely flooded, forcing families to evacuate rapidly, sometimes in the dead of night, losing all their meager possessions. The rivers, though crucial arteries of life and commerce, became particularly menacing. Rivers like the Missouri and Platte, swollen with meltwater and often choked with breaking ice flows, transformed into impassable, raging torrents. These ice jams could lead to flash floods and reroute river flows, devastating anything in their path. The sudden thaw, therefore, was a deceptive promise. While it might have marked the end of the blizzard's immediate threat, it heralded a new, equally dangerous phase of survival, presenting a fresh, wet challenge after a season of frozen desolation, a river's icy embrace rather than a gentle welcome to spring. Emerging from the long night of winter, pioneers found themselves confronted not with solid ground, but with an altered landscape. The receding floodwaters and melting snow left behind a pervasive, thick and unyielding obstacle: mud. The mud's sticky grasp was a final frustrating challenge in their freedom, a hard-won victory against the elements that often came at a significant physical cost. The soils of the Great Plains, particularly the rich loess and glacial till, become incredibly tenacious when saturated. Spring thaws, coupled with the rain that often followed, transformed trails and fields into impassable quagmires. Wagons, previously a symbol of progress and mobility, became hopelessly bogged down. Livestock, crucial for farming and transportation, struggled through the viscous muck, expending immense energy and often becoming injured or lost. The sheer effort required for any movement, even basic tasks like accessing water or tending to animals, was dramatically increased. Agricultural historians cite spring mud as a major determinant in planting schedules and initial farm productivity, impacting the entire growing season. For the settlers exiting their subterranean homes, the mud was not just an inconvenience, it was a psychological barrier. After months of cramped, dark confinement, the promise of freedom and activity was often thwarted by the sticky, exhausting reality of the terrain. Tasks like digging out livestock, clearing drainage channels around their dugouts, or simply walking to a neighbor's farm became Herculean efforts. The ubiquitous presence of mud also exacerbated hygiene issues, making it difficult to keep clothes, living spaces, and even bodies clean, contributing to the spread of disease within vulnerable, recently confined populations. Yet, despite its arduous nature, this struggle against the mud was a sign of life's return. The earth was thawing, becoming pliable once more, ready for the plough and the promise of a new growing season. The hard-won freedom, fought for inch by arduous inch through the clinging mud, was a testament to the pioneers' enduring determination. It was the final, messy chapter in their winter odyssey, a powerful reminder that survival on the Great Plains was a continuous, multifaceted battle, where even the arrival of spring brought its own demanding tests of human resilience and resolve. After months spent in the earthen womb of the dugout, enduring the claustrophobia and the gloom, the spring thaw, despite its challenges, brought forth an irresistible urge. It was the call of the wild, a profound, almost primal hunger for the open sky that drove pioneers from their shelters and back into the vast, expansive landscape that had once threatened to consume them. This yearning for openness was both a physical and psychological imperative. For individuals confined to small, dark spaces for extended periods, the return to open air and natural light is a powerful restorative. Modern sensory deprivation studies consistently demonstrate the adverse effects of prolonged confinement on mental health, including increased anxiety and depression. Conversely, exposure to natural light and expansive views has been shown to improve mood and cognitive function. For the pioneers, this was an intuitive drive. The memory of endless days under the earthen gloom made the sight of the limitless prairie, even if still muddy, a profound relief. The hunger for the open sky was intrinsically linked to the renewed possibilities of spring. It signaled the return of life-sustaining work. With the snow gone or rapidly receding, the land beckoned farmers to prepare for planting, hunters to seek game, and children to resume outdoor play. This move from passive survival to active engagement with their environment was crucial for healing the psychological wounds of winter. Agricultural records from the late 19th century Nebraska indicate a furious pace of activity once the ground became workable, with pioneers eager to make up for lost time and ensure the success of their crops. This innate drive to reconnect with the vastness of the plains was not merely about escaping the dugout's confines. It was about reclaiming their purpose. The promise of the land, the very reason they had ventured west, reasserted itself. The open sky, once a symbol of the terrifying, untamed elements, now represented boundless potential and the unbroken cycle of life. It was a powerful affirmation that their desperate winter strategy had succeeded, allowing them to emerge and embrace the expansive world once more, driven by an unyielding desire to build a future under the infinite blue dome of the Great Plains. As the seasons turned and the Great Plains burst into verdant life, the physical evidence of the brutal winter slowly faded. Yet the landscape itself bore subtle marks, and the human spirit, more profoundly, carried deeper imprints. The scarred landscape and the resilient pioneers who stood upon it served as a powerful testament to resilience, a living legacy of adaptation, determination, and the human will to thrive against all odds. The physical scars on the landscape were often ephemeral but potent. Eroded hillsides showed the force of the spring thaw. Fields, sometimes barren from late planting or struggling under flood-compacted soil, told of the difficult start to the growing season. And though gradually absorbed by the earth, the occasional collapsing dugout or abandoned sod house stood as a stark reminder of those who did not survive, or who wisely moved on to better prepared structures. Archaeological surveys of pioneer sites often reveal the progressive development of more sophisticated earth shelter designs and later, above-ground construction, indicating a rapid learning process born of harsh experience. More enduring were the scars carried by the pioneers themselves. These were not just the physical ailments, the chronic coughs from damp conditions, the lingering pains of frostbite, or the occasional missing digit, but the profound psychological transformations. The experiences forged an unshakable self-reliance and a deep understanding of the land's power. Children who survived such winters would carry these lessons into adulthood, influencing their agricultural practices, community building, and their very outlook on existence. Generational stories, passed down through families, reinforce these values, contributing to the distinctive prairie grit often associated with plain settlers. Ultimately, the act of hiding underground was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat, a temporary capitulation to an insurmountable force allowing for eventual resurgence. It fostered an unparalleled bond with the land, forcing an intimacy with the very soil that both protected and challenged them. This intimate relationship between human ingenuity and environmental necessity created a unique chapter in American history. The scarred landscape and the indomitable spirit of its inhabitants are a testament to how crucial adaptation and a deep understanding of one's environment were not just for surviving, but for ultimately settling and shaping the vast, unforgiving American West. This narrative underlines the fundamental truth of frontier life. Survival was not just about strength, but about profound, sometimes desperate, ingenuity. As the snows melted and the land slowly came back to life, one of the most profound reliefs for pioneers emerging from their dugouts was perhaps the simplest: access to clean, liquid water. After months of relying on melted snow, recycled cooking water, or stagnant sources, the taste of fresh water was a relief beyond measure, signifying not just physical hydration, but a tangible connection to the revitalized world. During the height of winter, obtaining potable water was a constant struggle, often fraught with difficulty and risk. Rivers and streams froze solid, and wells could become inaccessible or contaminated. The primary source of drinking water for many trapped in dugouts was melted snow. While snow is essentially distilled water, melting it required precious fuel, and the melted product often took on a flat, insipid taste. Historical accounts speak of a persistent low-level dehydration, exacerbated by the dry air generated by indoor fires and the sheer effort involved in melting enough snow for daily needs. Furthermore, collection methods could easily lead to contamination from soot or surface impurities. The spring thaw, therefore, brought not only an abundance of water, but often a significant improvement in its quality. As groundwater levels recharged and surface snow melted into natural springs or flowing streams, the opportunity arose to collect fresh, clean water free from the immediate threats of winter's impurities. This access to pure water was crucial for improving hygiene, flushing out homes, and significantly reducing the risk of waterborne illnesses that were always a concern with less sanitary winter sources. The ability to drink deeply without effort, or to wash thoroughly without guilt over wasted resources, represented a profound normalization of life. This simple act, the unburdened consumption of fresh water, was more than biological necessity. It was deeply symbolic. The revitalization of water sources mirrored the revitalization of life on the plains. It cleansed both body and spirit, washing away some of the grit and grime of winter. The taste, crisp and clean against mouths accustomed to stale or melted snow, was a visceral reminder that the cycle of life had turned, and with it, the promise of renewal for the hardy souls who had weathered the storm. It was a fundamental pleasure, a tangible reward for enduring the long, dark season. Emerging from the long winter's confinement, the surface world, though beckoning with sunlight, was not without its own insidious threats. The unseen dangers of spring formed a crucial part of a vigilant return to the surface, demanding constant awareness from pioneers already weary from months of survival. This transition from total isolation to re-engagement with the broader environment often presented unexpected challenges. One of the most immediate dangers was the condition of the land itself. The widespread flooding and saturation from melting snow significantly altered terrain. Previously, firm ground could be soft and treacherous, prone to collapsing underfoot, especially near riverbanks or saturated slopes. Overhangs of snow and ice, undermined by thaw, could unexpectedly break free. Such conditions posed risks to both humans and livestock, leading to falls, injuries, or animals becoming mired. Accounts from historical sources like the Kansas Historical Society sometimes detail unfortunate accidents happening even after the main storm had passed. Beyond the immediate physical landscape, the return of spring also brought a revival of biological threats. Mosquitoes, flies, and other insects, dormant during the winter, re-emerged with a vengeance, bringing with them the potential for disease transmission. Malaria, yellow fever, and dysentery were significant health concerns in many frontier areas, and the standing water left by spring thaws provided ideal breeding grounds for disease vectors. The weakened state of individuals after a long winter, often with compromised immune systems due to poor nutrition and lack of sunlight, made them particularly vulnerable to these renewed biological assaults. Moreover, the vastness of the plains, though now thawed, still harbored dangers from wildlife, often displaced or made more aggressive by the changing seasons. The end of winter also signaled the resumption of potential human conflict, whether with indigenous peoples, who were also re-establishing their hunting grounds, or with rival settlers over resources. Thus, the return to the surface was not a simple act of walking into sunshine. It was a calculated risk, a vigilant re-entry into a challenging world where the unseen dangers demanded the same, if not greater, degree of resilience and resourcefulness as the blizzards themselves. The pioneers' continuous adaptation to these evolving threats underscored their unyielding determination to carve out a life in the American West. After the long, dark confinement of winter, the sensation of unfiltered natural light and warmth on the skin was an experience of profound relief and renewal. The sun's gentle kiss was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a healing warmth after the freeze, invigorating bodies and spirits worn thin by months of cold, damp, and gloom. This vital connection to the sun symbolized not just the end of winter, but a physiological and psychological rebirth. From a physiological perspective, the return of abundant sunlight was critical for the health of pioneers. As noted in earlier chapters, prolonged lack of sunlight during winter led to vitamin D deficiency, contributing to weakened immune systems and general malaise. The sun's ultraviolet B (UVB) rays are essential for the body's synthesis of vitamin D. Re-exposure to sunlight would slowly begin to reverse these deficiencies, strengthening bones, improving mood, and enhancing overall physical resilience. Early 20th century medical observations, following similar patterns in northern climates, began to formally link sunlight exposure to health outcomes before vitamin D was even fully understood. Psychologically, the sun's warmth actively countered the cold despair that had permeated the dugouts. Light therapy, now a recognized treatment for seasonal affective disorder, works on principles intuitively understood by pioneers. The increase in natural light, particularly the blue light spectrum present in morning sunlight, helps regulate circadian rhythms and boost mood-regulating neurotransmitters like serotonin. After months in earth and gloom, the vibrant spectrum of outdoor light would have felt intensely stimulating, fostering a renewed sense of energy and optimism. The impact extended to the land itself. The sun's warmth melted the remaining snow and ice, dried out the saturated earth, and initiated the growth cycle of prairie grasses and emerging crops. This return of vitality to the landscape mirrored the internal transformation occurring within the pioneers. The sun's gentle kiss was therefore a multifaceted healer symbolizing the end of a harrowing ordeal and the beginning of a fresh start. It was a tangible promise of life, warmth, and sustenance, inviting them to step fully back into the world, leaving the memory of the freeze behind and embracing the boundless potential of the Great Plains spring. With the sun's return, the Great Plains began to stir, shedding its icy mantle and awakening with an almost audible exhalation. The gentle sound of thawing earth, the chirping of birds, and the rustle of emerging grasses became the whispers of spring. Not just an auditory experience, but the tangible manifestation of a new cycle, a renewed hope. For the pioneers, this was the ultimate reward for their winter endurance. The ecological transformation of the prairie in spring was dramatic and rapid. Dormant seeds burst into life, drawing nutrients from the newly unfrozen soil. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. Bison, deer, and other wildlife grazed on the fresh growth, re-establishing their patterns after a winter of challenging foraging. Ornithological and botanical records from the 19th century highlight the explosive biodiversity that characterized the short-lived but intense Great Plains spring, a stark contrast to the monochromatic winter. This natural renewal resonated deeply with the human experience. The pioneers, having survived their own period of dormancy and hardship, now stood at the precipice of a new growing season, with the critical task of planting and cultivating their crops. This act of stewardship, of working the fertile earth, was central to their vision of the future. The whispers of spring brought the promise of food, of self-sufficiency, and the eventual realization of their homesteading dreams. It was a time for repairing storm damage, tending to livestock, and most importantly, preparing the ground for planting, the very purpose that drew them to the vast lands of the West. The renewed hope was not a naive optimism, but a hard-earned one, tempered by the long, brutal winter. Pioneers understood that spring was fleeting, and the next winter would eventually arrive. Yet, each new spring brought with it a chance for growth, for building upon the lessons of the past. The dugout, once a critical refuge, would now be cleaned, repaired, or perhaps replaced by a more substantial above-ground structure as resources allowed. These improvements, built through collective effort, symbolized more than just shelter. They represented the establishment of permanent roots, the slow, determined forging of communities in what was once a wilderness. The whispers of spring, therefore, were a powerful affirmation of life's perpetual renewal, a testament to the enduring human spirit and its capacity to find hope in the cyclical rhythm of nature, even after the darkest of freezes. As the plains shed its winter silence, one of the most anticipated and reassuring signs of spring's full arrival was the observable return of larger wildlife. The return of the herds was more than a seasonal phenomenon. It was a powerful sign of life's persistence for both the natural world and the human inhabitants, affirming the cyclical rhythms of the vast ecosystem. Before widespread human settlement, the Great Plains were dominated by vast herds of American bison, barn bison. While their numbers had been severely depleted by the mid-19th century, smaller groups and other migratory animals like elk and deer still moved across the landscape. These animals, which had often sought shelter in more hospitable valleys or moved south during the severest winter months, would begin their northward migration with the burgeoning of new grasses. Their presence indicated a healthy, productive ecosystem, crucial for sustenance and often observed by pioneers with a keen understanding of wildlife patterns. Zoological studies of migratory behavior confirm that these movements are intrinsically linked to seasonal forage availability. For pioneers, particularly during the early phases of settlement, the return of game herds was directly tied to their own food security. While they brought domesticated livestock, hunting remained an important source of protein, especially after a long winter, where stored provisions might be at their lowest. The sight of bison or deer grazing on the revitalized prairie meant an opportunity to replenish dwindling meat supplies, a practical and immediate benefit. Archaeological digs at homestead sites frequently uncover projectile points and faunal remains indicative of opportunistic hunting, especially in the spring. Beyond the immediate practical benefits, the return of the herds offered a profound psychological uplift. After months of stark whiteness and the absence of large, dynamic life, the vibrant movement of animals across the landscape was a visual counterpoint to the winter's stagnation. It affirmed the natural order, signaled the reawakening of the plains, and offered a sense of continuity. It was a visible promise that the land, though harsh, was ultimately fertile and capable of sustaining life. The return of the herds was therefore a potent symbol of resilience, echoing the pioneers' own endurance and strengthening their belief in the persistent, powerful life force of the American West. The pioneers who survived the brutal winters of the Great Plains carried more than just physical memories of frostbite and hunger. They carried deep personal narratives. The stories they carried were a powerful legacy etched in the earth, tales of unparalleled hardship, ingenuity, and profound resilience that shaped their identity and continue to inform our understanding of this pivotal era in American history. These narratives, often passed down orally or meticulously recorded in cherished diaries and letters, speak of the extreme measures taken for survival. They detail the construction of dugouts, the rationing of meager rations, the enduring claustrophobia, and the constant fear of the elements. For example, accounts from families in the Children's Blizzard of 1888 reveal incredible acts of courage and sacrifice, demonstrating how even in the direst circumstances, humanity's innate drive to protect loved ones prevailed. These first-hand observations are invaluable for historians, providing granular detail beyond official records. Beyond individual experiences, the collective memory of winter survival fostered a unique cultural identity among plain settlers. It cultivated an ethos of self-reliance, community cooperation, and an intimate, often wary, respect for the power of nature. This cultural legacy is evident in the architecture, agricultural practices, and social structures that evolved on the frontier. The transition from rudimentary dugouts to more permanent sod houses, and eventually to timber-framed homes, physically documented an evolution in adaptive strategies. Each stage built upon the hard-won knowledge of previous winters. The legacy of these experiences is etched not just in historical records, but quite literally in the earth. The subtle depressions that mark former dugout sites across the plains, now often overgrown with grass, are archaeological footprints of this hidden history. They serve as silent monuments to the men, women, and children who wrestled a living from the unforgiving land, adapting their homes in unimaginable ways to endure the deadly winter storms. Their stories, both spoken and archaeologically preserved, are a testament to the extraordinary human spirit, reminding us that progress on the frontier was not merely about conquest, but about a profound and creative negotiation with nature, often involving a retreat beneath the very surface of the land to survive. After the prolonged silence, the whispered prayers, and the muffled sounds of constant struggle within the dugout, the return of spring brought with it a most welcome and profound sound: laughter. The sound of laughter, often born from relief and shared experience, was a fragile joy after the ordeal, signifying not a forgetting of the hardship, but rather a powerful, resilient affirmation of life itself. Human psychologists and sociologists recognize laughter as a vital coping mechanism, especially in the aftermath of trauma or prolonged stress. It serves to release tension, foster social bonding, and re-establish a sense of normalcy. For pioneer families emerging from their subterranean confinement, the ability to laugh at a shared memory of a comical mishap, at the sheer absurdity of their past predicament, or simply out of the exuberance of newfound freedom, was a critical step in psychological recovery. This spontaneous expression of joy was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a sign that the winter's despair had not utterly vanquished their optimism. The laughter was often fragile, tinged with the recent memories of scarcity and fear. It was not boisterous or carefree, but rather a more subdued, knowing laughter, shared amongst those who had endured together. It underscored the deep bonds of community and family that had been forged or strengthened in the face of adversity. Children, perhaps more readily than adults, embraced this return to lightness, their uninhibited giggles echoing across the reawakened prairie, a stark contrast to the quiet solemnity of the dugout. Historians of frontier life often cite instances where seemingly minor events, such as the first warm day, an unexpected visitor, or a successful hunt, could trigger waves of much-needed levity among hard-pressed pioneers. This fragile joy was a necessary balm. It allowed families to process, collectively and individually, the immense stress of the preceding months. It was a conscious act of reclaiming their humanity and their hope, demonstrating that even amidst the ongoing challenges of frontier life, the hard labor of farming, the continued isolation, and the looming threat of future winters, the capacity for joy persisted. The sound of laughter, bouncing off the vast open plains, became a symbol of victory, a defiant echo against the memory of the bitter wind, a clear signal that life, against all odds, would not only continue, but flourish. The prolonged struggle for survival in the dugouts, while a period of immense hardship, was also a crucible for profound learning. The experience left the pioneers with more than just memories. It bestowed upon them the weight of experience, a unique wisdom forged in winter's grip that fundamentally reshaped their approach to life on the frontier, preparing them for future challenges. This wisdom manifested in several practical ways. Homesteaders quickly learned the critical importance of preparedness. Winter provisions, food, fuel, and fodder for livestock were now carefully estimated and stored with an almost religious zeal, often far in excess of immediate perceived needs. The construction of later dwellings reflected an understanding of the plains climate, with more attention paid to insulation, windbreaks, and secure foundations. The evolution from simple dugouts to more sophisticated sod houses and eventually framed structures often incorporated lessons learned during past blizzards, with improved ventilation systems and deeper cellars. Architectural historians often trace a direct line from these early basic shelters to later, more resilient prairie homes, each iteration a product of experience. Beyond the practical, there was a psychological and communal wisdom. The experience cultivated an acute awareness of the precarious balance between human endeavor and nature's raw power. Pioneers developed a profound respect for weather patterns, learning to read subtle signs in the sky and on the land that might foretell an impending storm, something novice settlers often missed. Community bonds, forged in mutual dependency and shared ordeal, became stronger. Neighbors developed informal support networks, checking on each other, sharing resources, and offering assistance, a crucial adaptation in sparsely populated regions lacking formal emergency services. This wisdom, born of direct, lived experience, became a cornerstone of the pioneer spirit. It was not theoretical knowledge gleaned from books, but practical, visceral understanding earned through suffering and survival. It underscored the reality that settling the Great Plains was an ongoing negotiation with the environment, demanding constant vigilance, adaptive ingenuity, and an unyielding will. The weight of experience, therefore, became a powerful resource, ensuring that the lessons learned in the dark, cold confines of the dugout would ultimately serve to build a more resilient and enduring civilization upon the vast, open expanse of the American West. The mere existence of dugouts and sod houses, crude yet effective bastions against certain death, serves as a powerful testament to the sheer force of human will. The hands that built these subterranean sanctuaries were not necessarily trained architects or engineers, but they embodied a tribute to ingenuity and grit, transforming the unforgiving plains into a landscape dotted with critical, life-saving shelters. The construction of a dugout was a deeply pragmatic, labor-intensive undertaking, often completed by a single family with minimal tools. The primary tools included shovels, picks, and axes. Even if timber was scarce, axes were essential for cutting sod or shaping any available wood. Sodbusters, specifically designed plows, were also critical for cutting the thick prairie sod into manageable bricks. Expert archaeological teams have meticulously reconstructed these building processes, often revealing surprisingly effective drainage systems and structural reinforcements adapted to the local geology. These early pioneers were, by necessity, their own architects, builders, and laborers. Ingenuity was paramount in overcoming resource scarcity. On the treeless prairies, alternatives to timber for roofing supports were constantly sought. Willow branches, cottonwood saplings, or even bundles of prairie grass twisted into ropes were employed where larger logs were unavailable. The use of sod itself was a remarkable adaptation. Its dense root mat provided structural integrity and excellent insulation, turning a common natural resource into a versatile building material. This innovative use of local materials highlights a deep understanding of their environment, learned not from textbooks, but through observation and harsh experience. The grit involved in building these structures cannot be overstated. Digging into frozen earth, hauling heavy sod blocks, and constructing a roof capable of bearing massive snow loads, all while facing the constant threat of starvation or exposure, demanded extraordinary physical and mental fortitude. These were not merely houses, they were bunkers for survival, each one a monument to the relentless effort of men and women determined to carve a life out of the American West. The hands that built them, calloused and weary, etched their legacy not only in the earth, but in the enduring spirit of adaptability and perseverance that defined the frontier.